Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Sean Blackman, here with Jackie Dupont. And as always, we are your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. And today we're having a weekly edition of our segment, the Redspin Report. We discuss sports, politics, and struggle with Nate Wallace, co-host of the Redspin Sports Podcast. Nate, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Sean and Jackie. Glad to be back. We definitely got a lot on the agenda today, so let's get after it.
Definitely. And, Nate, there's been an interesting and I think positive development here with the Major League Baseball Players Association officially endorsing the Amazon Union Drive happening down in Bessemer, Alabama. And they put out a statement that says, quote, "The MLBPA encourages you to vote yes and work together in a union to create better lives for yourselves, your families, your coworkers, and future generations of workers." Now, the votes in that union drive will be counted on March 30th, and more than 5,000 workers will be taking part in what has been a serious struggle. I mean, just ridiculous conditions faced by workers down there in Amazon, of course, headed up by the world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, who has more money than any person could spend in one lifetime. But Nate, I'm curious what you make of this act of workers' solidarity across industry here is from the MLBPA, particularly given what we know around the culture of Major League Baseball.
Right. I mean, looking at sports, the longest criticism, and it's been fair, has been one that it's these aren't really workers. You hear people there's people on the left. We all know there's probably people listening right now that are like, oh, why are they talking about sports again? That reactionary stuff. It doesn't relate to worker struggles. It's millionaires fighting with billionaires. And I think that that's just fundamentally not right. And the reality is that, as we've said many times, that billionaires in sports making more money, paying players less doesn't mean, or not paying players less doesn't mean that money's going to be taken out of their pocket and is going to be going towards the kind of programs of social uplift, programs that are going to be crucial to transforming our systems of education, healthcare, taking money away from incarceration and into other areas. So what we're seeing now, I think, are the effects of the last summer, the effect of what happened with George Floyd, what happened with Breonna Taylor, what happened with COVID and the lack of education about COVID. Then when George Floyd happened, that was a big spark. We saw again with Jacob Blake, and we saw that there was just increasing conversation, awareness, and really repudiation of the whole Michael Jordan, play the game, just go along to get along, making sure you don't offend or step on anybody's toes. We've seen now MLBPA come out strongly in support and solidarity of Amazon workers, along with the NFL players that already had done so previously. And that's not insignificant. There's a growing awareness around that. I mean, Justin Jackson had, Christian Smalls on his show for the Amazon guy in Staten Island that had Chris Smalls that had done, that took that action during the pandemic, exposing what they were doing at fulfillment centers there. There's movements amongst UPS workers to try to build solidarity, and instead of looking at them as the Amazon workers as oh, they're not organized, they're not unionized, that's not our problem. No, they need to be organized, and we need to fight and stand in solidarity with them to make that happen. So the fact that Bernie Sanders is supportive and Joe Biden, I don't even know what to make. He lends his support for their union right to have a union, whatever that means. Just Biden again, another example is Jackie talks about so well with Democratic Party window dressing, essentially, of knowing how to signal support for things while then using creative language to never actually do anything. So I don't put much weight on that, but I think it's really, really significant. And knowing the history of labor law in Alabama and in the Deep South, knowing that New Era, the company that makes Major League Baseball's hats, are also is an Alabama company, ball caps. It's taking the fight right to the most reactionary parts of the country in terms of labor law, and standing in solidarity, making it an issue is critically important.
Yeah, and the fight for solidarity with workers, working class people, and even on the side of amateur athletes, which I look at them as a part of the working class, is playing out also not just in MLBPA's support for the workers of Amazon, but now there is this Supreme Court case that is supposed to be heard on March 31st, the NCAA versus Alston. And this involves, I guess, the very designation of amateur athletes and whether they get paid or not by the NCAA. And it appears that this amicus brief sort of confused at least some of the players or former players in the NCAA who are listed on the brief as being supportive of keeping the amateur athlete designation the way it is now, with what they really believe is that it should be changed. They weren't sure what is going on with this Supreme Court case, NCAA versus Alston, and this amicus brief that the former NCAA players say, some of them say they were confused about what it really meant.
Right. So, I mean, it's the NCAA cannot get out of its own way. I mean, this is just wild. I mean, we have so much going on in terms of what's the name, image, and likeness stuff, which is another issue that I don't want to muddy. So I want to get to the primary issue you just brought up, but where more and more states are going to have name, image, and likeness like laws to allow players to profit off of their name, image, and likeness. And many people think that's just sort of a concession they're making to sort of keep the system intact. That just means you could do a commercial for a car dealership, and make some money, while creating a situation where you have state law directly contradicting NCAA rules, right? And that's becoming, it's increasingly, we're reaching a tipping point. And that's an SI.com article by Ross Dellinger. I encourage people to check out about that. But how it ties into this and the Supreme Court issue at hand about the very nature of amateurism is important, because Darren McFadden is a player who was a superstar running back for the Arkansas Razorbacks along with Felix Jones. And, you talk about the amount of money and attention that Arkansas got when he played for them. His last year would have been 2007, was enormous. I mean, it cannot be overstated. And the reality is that they draft people like McFadden, NCAA did, into being on the side of the NCAA in this case, NCAA versus Alston, and which will be heard on March 31st. And the NCAA went and searched. They found these 18 former college athletes to quote express support for the stance of college sports governing body. So the association has appealed a lower federal court ruling that says the NCAA violates antitrust laws with some of its caps on athletic scholarships. All right. And in making their case, the pro NCAA filing states that the athlete's interest lies in ensuring the proper adherence to the revered tradition of amateurism and the continued availability of intercollegiate athletics, essentially saying it's the role of high revenue, hyper exploited, college football, major college football, and men's basketball. March Madness, which is coming up here soon, is going to be a bizarre spectacle. It's going to be going on in a bubble type setting this year. That those people, that their labor is required to finance all the other maybe non-revenue sports. So it's classic neoliberalism. It's the idea that these players that are the big money sports that boosters love to finance and people love watching on TV the most, that somehow they're being made to feel guilty that without their free labor, it's going to destroy the overall model of amateurism. We couldn't possibly fund things on a different level. We couldn't possibly have a different structure of how universities are structured and how money gets spent. No, it's the fault of athletes. So now the interesting thing is McFadden is saying essentially in what's supposed to be a supporting, his statements in this are supposed to be supporting the NCAA's case in this are actually full of quotes such as this, where McFadden goes, if once you're an adult, you want to make sure you can take care of your family. You don't really get that opportunity to help out while you're in college, McFadden said. later adding that he supported college athletes getting extra additional stipends and their scholarships. He talked about, being from a really rough neighborhood in Little Rock, Arkansas, where he grew up, and being unable to even afford paying a $50 parking ticket at the University of Arkansas while he was making them untold amounts of money. And the same thing, Walter Bond, a former University of Minnesota basketball star who played in the NBA, this was supposedly the guy helping support the NCAA's case, said that he goes, I think I must have misunderstood, Bond later said, about the case, acknowledging that it was possible he didn't actually agree with the NCAA's position. So this is how discombobulated and unable the NCAA is to actually find any high-profile figures. They have to resort to tricking people, basically. And I would suspect even bribing in one way or another. Former athletes who had clout to try to join this case. And when they joined and they submitted, they gave their thoughts, they testified. It wasn't their testimony. It wasn't at all what the NCAA was looking for. So I think it's a perfect kind of illustration of just what a moribund and exploitative reality NCAA amateurism is, and why I think, despite how unjust it is dying a slow death, and we're going to see change. Now, the kind of organization that happens amongst athletes and unpaid campus athletic workers and the kind of solidarity they are shown is going to make a big difference on what that change is going to look like.
Yeah, and Nate, I literally just shook my head when I read that phrase, like the revered tradition of amateurism. That's just such empty, sentimental claptrap and an excuse for a wealthy interest to not pay workers for their labor. I don't know how else to say it, particularly given what we know about what athletes sacrifice on so many levels that produces the fabulous wealth for these schools and for these owners at the professional level. And so to suggest that to pay these student athletes, is impugning on some tradition, like that's some kind of vulgarity, or it seems vulgar to me, to continue to put these young people's bodies and lives on the line just for the benefit of these institutions that they don't see any part of. That to me is vulgar. You see what I mean? And even thinking about those sacrifices that athletes can make. I'm put in mind of the case of Trey Mason, a former NFL back. His mother has said that he basically has the consciousness of a 10-year-old child because of the head injuries that he sustained while playing football. And I know that at one point he's been admitted to a hospital for evaluation regarding some of this, and his mother has complained of him acting erratically and things like that. Well, what we're looking at, I think, is just one example of the toll that these sports take on these players, on these human beings. And that, that's the side of it, that isn't glamorous. And it's not the flashing lights and the big money and the millionaire lifestyle and things like that. And when you compare and contrast, particularly when you consider that a lot of these cats do this from the time that they're young children up until adulthood. And we know that about the relatively short careers about professional football players, particularly. I think, given some positions are more physical than others. But, you basically have this small window to make a lot of money, and you walk away with all the bruises. Meanwhile, this massive corporate structure remains unscathed. And so when we look at, just kind of a tragic situation like Trey Mason, Nate, I think it just sort of shows some of the glaring inequalities that exist within organized sports, even amongst, the elements of athletes that may be well paid.
Right. No doubt. So this article in the Palm Beach Post that I sent you goes back to 2016. And part of the reason it's so dated and why I still think it's relevant, though, is that, Trey Mason was, I remember clearly, I was at the Rose Bowl on January 6, 2014, my brother's last ever college football game. It looked like he had just scored the game-winning go-ahead touchdown, only a little over a minute remaining to put Auburn on top 31-27 over my brother's team, Florida State. And it looked like the game was over, minus a last-minute drive led by Jameis Winston and a touchdown caught by Kelvin Benjamin. Trey Mason was going to be the hero of that game. And you think that was just in the beginning of 2014. Okay, say, so he plays 2 years with the St. Louis Rams and now with the Los Angeles Rams again. And but after his second year, he just disappears. No one knows where he's gone. And then this is where the story comes in, where there was a deal where he was, Palm Beach County Sheriff deputies, where he was out of his mind. Basically, he was riding ATVs all over the place, like cutting in and out, like different. He was going 80 miles per hour through like intersections of neighborhoods and stuff, and roads, putting a lot of people at risk. He was known for having a bruising running style and sustained a lot of concussions. That's a fact. And you even have the deputy quoted in here on the video saying like, but he's effing around over here. He said, while speaking outside the residence, that he should be at LA Rams training camp, but the deputy says, but he's effing around over here. His career is going down the tubes. And then basically to watch it, basically his mother was happy they took his ATV away. And then the deputy commented to Tina Mason, his mother, that he should be playing football now. Maybe that he'd be out of trouble, want to be out here on the streets. And she goes, no, actually he shouldn't. There's CTE in this head injury thing. You can say he should be playing football, but this is not what it is. So anyways, it's really wild when you think of that, and especially in the context of Vincent Jackson's passing, at the Super Bowl in Tampa, but just conjunction with that, you had him dying in a hotel room only 2 days after police checked on him and said he was fine, right? A 38-year-old. And we've had the Spade, Louis Nix III, who's still a lot of mystery around. His family in my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, is demanding answers. And he was shot in a robbery in December of 2020. He was considered he's always been a gentle giant. I mean, I coached against him in high school football. I remember he played against my brother in high school and college. Was a real hero to so many kids in Northwest Jacksonville, in a rough area of Jacksonville that is under-resourced. And to see like someone like him, who was such an inspiration, got a scholarship at Notre Dame, became a star there, went on to the NFL before his body failed him, and he's dead now. At 29, he'll never be able to grow and into something else and whatnot. And you have the same Vincent Jackson. You've had I can go down the list. I mean, the guy 10 years ago, Kenny McKinley, a great receiver at South Carolina when I was there, who committed suicide after getting cut, from the Denver Broncos. And it's not just CTE. It's also about, the way in which people are trained and conditioned to be one-dimensional. And for Mason, it probably is more just CTE. But I mean, this is a guy who, and you look at the other important point, I know we're running out of time, is that look at the money that is being spent at these schools. It is on massive facilities. I sent you all a video on the Texas A&M facility, which is really like a fascist type, narrated, just filmed for just an insane spectacle. I need the link to it or somewhere. It's just absolutely mind blowing. But all of these schools are in an arms race to build a water slide or something to their facility. Add bowling alleys to build the craziest locker rooms, the best facilities, all these gadgets and gizmos. And I'm pretty darn sure that these players that are suffering, that have family issues, would much rather actually be compensated for their labor than have the most dope video game studio imaginable outside the locker room. I mean, okay, that's cool, but the totality of all that, and just Alabama builds this, so Auburn, we got to build this, and Clemson, we got to build this. It really is an arms race, and that is money that is not going to these unpaid laborers that are producing the spectacle that is really behind and driving all of that whole political economy. And Trey Mason is not just to highlight how this angry outburst. On July 23rd of that year, he was threatened to call the White House and have them all fired, and made comments regarding Al Qaeda and stuff. And that's sort of what his mother was referring to. And we don't know anything. Post 2018, he played 1 year in the CFL, the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and there's no news basically. And people online are wondering where he's gone, what's happened to him, and we don't know. And it begs a lot of questions. And that's really where we are right now. And I think it needs to be scrutinized, examined a lot more than it is, and especially not being done so by the sports media industrial complex of the corporate sports media. And that's a real shame.
Definitely. Well, we thank you, as always, Nate, for joining us today. We're going to leave it there and move to a break here on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C., but we will be back. So please stay with us.
By any means necessary.